Hi, everybody. Welcome to Nine Principles Framework in Action. I'm Dr. Kathy Oropallo, and I'm here to talk to you today about progress, not perfection, and finding the wins and capturing the learning from this year. I'm Dr. Kathy Oropallo. I'm a leader coach with Studer Education. I'm from Tampa, Florida, and I'm here to talk to you. I urge you to reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk with you about this. So for today, I thought I'd start with a little bit of storytelling. First of all, when I think about progress, I think about that old story. I'm sure some of you remember it, about the hundreds of starfish on the beach, and someone comes along and sees somebody throwing them back into the surf. And they ask, how can you possibly make a difference to all of those starfish on the beach? And the person throws one in and says, made a difference to that one. And I really think the story of progress is about that. It's about making a difference, one small win at a time, starfish by starfish, so to speak. When progress is realized, small wins are achieved, they benefit not only the individual, but the person that's making the difference. So I hope that you can see the power of progress today. I love this quote from the progress principle. It says, fostering progress and meaningful work is the most important way to keep people highly engaged. Even if that progress is a small win, it works because people want to contribute to something that matters. So if you could think back to 2020, the fall of 2020, hope this visual reminds you of where we were at. Try to imagine, teachers were facing students online. So that little graph in the bottom right corner, we had kids with their screens off. We had many kids working from home. And so some of the challenges that we were facing were things like chronic absenteeism and kids missing. And so today I want to share with you the story of one school, Erwin Middle School in Jefferson County. And I want to talk to you about the problem that they were encountering and how they were able to use progress to help them solve problems. By tracking their progress, one of the things they noticed early in the first quarter and the second quarter was a high rate of chronic absenteeism. And so about 18% of their students were either missing or not showing up. And in the first quarter, and about 15% in the second quarter. Just a little bit about Erwin Middle School. They were 12 out of 15 in their county, and they had about a 94% free and reduced lunch rate. Some of the things that they did was they began to develop a process of continuous improvement with a leadership team. And this leadership met regularly to report out on their data every 30, 60, and 90 days. This detailed look at their data helped them really begin to solve some really important problems. And some of the strategies the leadership team came up with were things like failure contact list for teachers. They were addressing the remote absenteeism. They were increasing their parental contact. The teachers came up with a system to help kids that were re-engaging in the system with recovery packets. They made home visits, multiple home visits. And part of that is the story I'm going to share with you today. They had virtual parent conferences, and they met with teachers of students with failing grades. And they had a big data dig day every 30 days, which was powerful. Another thing they were doing, which was really powerful, was they were keeping track of what they were doing on a 30, 60, 90-day action plan. And the message was, don't keep it in your head, put it on paper, because when you put it on paper, it's visual and you can see your progress. Here's just this quick example of what that looks like. This was a part of their stoplight report, 30, 60, 90-day action plan. And you could see the individual roles of the leadership team and how they were tracking their progress. You can also see that over time, some of the contacts with parents decreased as they were able to re-engage students. So one of the things I want to do is tell you the story about two students and how this process of visually seeing the data, tracking progress, and working with a leadership team to solve problems really began to help the school solve these problems over time. So I'm going to tell you the story about two students. The first student, Sheila, was a student that actually was missing. She was enrolled and she hadn't been to school, or in the hybrid situation they were in, taking remote classes. She was essentially, they were having a hard time finding her. Finally, towards the end of the second quarter, they were able to, through a call campaign and through multiple call campaigns and over time, they were able to visit the house and start leaving notes on the door. And finally, the mom interacted with them. So Dr. Foster and the school's SRO had been taking multiple trips out to see if they could find the family, meet with the family, and get that student re-engaged. Their main focus wasn't just to get the student to school, but also to support the student in re-engaging and helping them make up missing work. So one of Dr. Foster's main goals was to get a recovery packet to the student and begin to find out what the barriers were with helping the student. When the mom finally responded to a note after about 8 visits out and multiple phone calls, she spoke with Dr. Foster and explained that the student, Sheila, was with her grandparents during the day, but they were having trouble with the technology. So when Dr. Foster offered to help with the technology, he even offered to go out to the house. They found out that she was traveling 35 to 40 minutes a day, and they found her at mom's place of work. So Dr. Foster visited the place of work and had a conference with, brought the recovery packet out and had a conference with the mom. And in that conversation, found out that both the mom and the student were having trouble logging in. And so Dr. Foster began going out there on a regular basis and meeting in the church during the mom's lunch break off of work, to show her how to log in, to show her how to check her daughter's work, and to show her how to help her daughter with that work. By the third quarter, the mom called and asked if she could return to school, and the student returned to school. This year, that student's thriving, hasn't missed more than 1 day of school, and is a C average. Just another story of how being focused on the data and the progress works, just one student at a time. The other student, Marco, is a similar story, except Marco came from a family who was a second language speaker, and his parents struggled to get him to come to school. His parents actively tried, but he's a middle schooler, was not complying. So Dr. Foster asked if he could come out after the student was referred to the leadership team. And after multiple communications with the family and going out, he asked if he could talk to Marco, and they sat and they talked, and he was able to get him to come back to school. And he was able to work with him once he was back to school to recover some of the work that he had missed. As a result of that, this year, Marco's now on the honor roll. So, part of the benefit of the story is that it wasn't trying to achieve big things. It was through small wins and tracking those wins and then trying to remove barriers along the way. That progress is what led to multiple stories like Sheila and Marco. Here's a picture of Dr. Foster and the SRO. And, even the parents have built such a positive relationship with Dr. Foster in the way that he was very student and family centered in his approach, and really just wanting the kids to not lose track and lose time with their academics. One parent even said that she routinely stops Dr. Foster to tell him that any parent she comes across says, that school really does care about us. That Dr. Foster, he went out of his way multiple times to help us. I think that's a powerful story. Real progress triggers positive emotions like satisfaction, gladness, and joy. And so one of the most powerful parts of progress is, again, not just what it does for our students and the people we're trying to help, but what it also does for the person trying to solve problems and trying to build successes along the way. So let's look a little bit at what we did in order to make that happen. I'm going to kind of go a little slower and show you a little bit about some of the things that we did to create progress. I like this quote that says, leaders working alongside engage in open, honest, and transparent dialogue with their teams to harvest wins and collectively determine actions needed to get better and better. This is a quote from Maximize Performance, by Janet Pilcher and Quint Studer. And this is really at the heart of the work. That leadership team worked together to harvest wins, and they worked together to collectively determine and create systems that made those stories work that I just shared with you. The other powerful thing is about the inner work life of people. When people have perceptions that they're making a difference, they actually work harder and are more persistent to achieve the goals that they set in place. That leadership team was just like that. In the fourth quarter, the beginning of the fourth quarter, the end of the third quarter, they found every one of those kids that were the original 115 kids missing on that chronic absentee list. The other thing is to remember that our flywheel here at Huron in Student Education, about the heart of the flywheel is that people want to feel like they have a sense of purpose. They're doing worthwhile work, and they're making a difference. And that's a really powerful piece to add to this conversation on progress. Also, I want to focus on not the progress, not the blame, but the progress, creating a culture of progress. So when we look at the things that happen when we create a culture of progress, we begin to recognize effort that has clear and meaningful goals, regular and intentional check-ins that we're going to talk about. Everyday actions are a source of learning. I think that's one of the most important things. This team were willing to learn. They were willing to make adjustments. They revisited and refined root cause as a team. The information was communicated and cascaded throughout the system. It flowed easy. They gathered feedback, and they used data that was valuable. They didn't try to measure everything, but they really stayed focused on what they did. And effort is celebrated, which I think is a powerful piece. And outcomes used to learn and plan what's next. So let me go through some of the things that you could do as a way of beginning this. And I'll use Erwin as an example of how they did it. So the first thing is to create clear and meaningful goals. One of the things that Erwin did was they committed to a single pillar scorecard. So in other words, their area of focus was student success. And what they measured were three items from the Harvard Capstone Project and a couple other university research projects that corroborated these readiness indicators. They looked at increasing 80% or better student attendance. Now remember, this was during the pandemic that we were doing this. They also looked at making sure students were achieving 80% or better in their achievement and their performance on grade level standards. And they also looked at whether or not students were at an 80% rate of completions for their coursework and their academic assignments. As a result of that, they had 3 goals that they focused on, and they had very, very strict focus on those things and collecting data just around those things. And they also executed with accountability. So they each had a role in those goals. Reliability, they held themselves and each other accountable. Did we do what we said we were going to do? And consistency. They met consistently and routinely every 30, 60, and 90 days. And in between that, they had weekly school meetings where they gathered to share information so that if something came up, they were able to do that. The second thing they did was they owned everyday actions to learn. So this is, again, an example of that. How are we tracking progress, and are we doing what we said we were going to do? They defined improvement in these 3 ways. What hassles were they eliminating? What was getting in the way? Were they improving outcomes, and were they solving problems? That helped lead them to know whether or not they were going from green to yellow to red. They stoplighted their action plan to show where they were in the process. This visual, very similar to like a video game, tells you where you are and how far you've got to go. It also signals when you get stuck, when things are moving slower than usual, and it prompts you to have discussion with your leadership team to talk about the barriers along the way. So this is an example of what it looks like. And then at the bottom of that action plan is a very important conversation that takes place. First of all, what are we learning as we are implementing this work in our everyday actions? And then what are some adjustments we need to make? Do we need to adopt something because it's working? Do we need to adapt something because it needs tweaking? Do we need to abandon something if we're not sure? And so that's a powerful part of this process. Here's an example of what it might look like when you're looking at that leadership team's action plan. You can see there's a lot of things ongoing. So things are moving, but they're not maybe necessarily moving as fast as they'd like, or there's something getting in the way. And this team did a really terrific job of doing that. So again, using the 3 A's of adjustment, they were adjusting their work as they went, and they were making sure that they had the evidence to tell them what was the right adjustment to make. And there's something to keep in mind before you abandon something. Sometimes things take a little time. Sometimes we need to be sure we have the right evidence in order for that to happen. Number 3 is regular check-ins and huddles often, so information flows easily and feedback and data are valued. One of the things we used was a leadership huddle routine agenda. This agenda we used at the 30-day mark, the 60-day mark, and the 90-day report out. We always began with wins and what have we learned. Then we had a presentation of the current data, where we were at, what we saw as wins, and places where we could grow, change, or improve. And we talked about what's working and if we were stuck in any place and why. And then the last thing we did was we would forecast what's the next thing we can do to tackle barriers and predict what will happen. This is an important step because it is in that predicting of what happens that it sets an intention. And that intention kept this team very focused on the work that they were doing. Another thing, number 4, is root causes identified as a team and refined by the learning about the barriers to the goal. So oftentimes we make assumptions about root cause. We come up with things we think is happening in the situations that we're striving to improve. So in this case, we were striving to improve chronic absenteeism. And what we noticed was, at first, we thought it might be a technology issue. We thought it might be a parent issue in terms of maybe parents were working. And what we discovered were many more root causes as we dug in. Things like homelessness, things like access to Wi-Fi. We had one student that got sent a Wi-Fi device, but they got evicted from the place they were at, and there was never a forwarding address, so they never received the equipment. Families' lack of understanding of technology. We made the assumption that just because they had a telephone or a cell phone, they knew how to use a device like a laptop. And those were 2 different navigation systems that they just were unaware of. The family's understanding of work and the attendance expectations. It was a pandemic, so parents didn't know. Is school mandatory? In March of 2020, there were a lot more looser guidance around attending school and being present on campus after the quarantine. So parents were confused about that. Families' perceptions of the school support. You know, many of them were worried about getting in trouble, or that the school wasn't really intentionally had their child's best interest. And so a lot of this, through the work of good folks like Dr. Foster, he built trust with those families. And that leadership team built community partnerships that built trust. Caregiver work schedules and students on their own a lot prevented some of the things. So constantly refining that root cause. 5 is wins routinely celebrated and visible. So this is a really important piece. How are you going to help people see the wins? How are you going to talk about the wins? How are you going to make sure that everybody involved knows about the wins? So one of the things they did was they regularly made data visible so that they could see small and big wins along the way. That's a critical part of the progress principle. We have to know we're making a difference. They hardwired wins into the first few minutes of any agenda that they had. So across the school, their agendas began with wins. They engaged the community, and the community responded to help teachers celebrate small wins by providing lunches each month. So one local church every single month in recognition of the hard work the teachers were doing. They rewarded them by providing them a lunch, and it was a very popular event. Those teachers were really grateful. They posted that information on Twitter and shared that they were getting appreciation, and communicated wins publicly as well as privately. There was television interviews and things that happened as a result of that. When results are used to learn and plan what's next, really important. So you're looking at two graphs on this page about parent contacts in the first year compared to last year. And if you notice the reduction in some of the things that occurred. So there were less parent contacts this year because they had created a system and they were on top of it. And they also had to distribute less academic packets because those packets were no longer needed because kids were attending school and they were on track academically. They were able to reduce remote attendance, and you could visually see quarter by quarter that reduction in the attendance. And then you can compare that to this year. Another really powerful win for them, and a way that they took what they learned the initial year into this year, was when there was behavior problems that were starting to occur at the school. Many of them involved young girls. And so the leadership team, with a partnership with the local church, came together and they were able to create a club, the Ambassadors Club, not only for the girls, but also for the boys. And this club actually helped reduce behavior incidents and increase academic improvement for the girls that you'll see in these next few pictures. So if you look at the school-wide increase in grade improvement as a result of participation, they didn't have one student drop out, which was really powerful. So this is the Leadership Club. You can see them making vision boards, which was really powerful. The Young Ambassadors Club was for boys, and they helped the boys learn how to tie a tie. They were able to do all kinds of really great male-oriented social skills with young men from the community that volunteered to be mentors to these young guys. Last year, Erwin rose from 12 out of 15 to now they're sitting at number 5 in their county as a result of this hard work. So what can you do to keep moving forward? Set clear goals, empower others, be helpful, and learn from the problems and successes. We know of all the things that can boost inner work life, the most important is making progress and meaningful work. And Erwin was a great story of meaningful work. I want to thank you today for joining me and learning about progress.